The air in our house had grown thin, a vacuum where intimacy once lived. It was a Tuesday, or perhaps a Thursday. The days had begun to blur into a monotonous procession of muted resentments. Tonight was one of Nicole's get-togethers, a phrase she deployed with a bright, brittle cheerfulness that grated against the silence between us. These gatherings were her stage, and I, the silent, accommodating stagehand. My role was simple: keep the snack bowls full, offer vapid pleasantries to people whose names I could never retain, and fade into the beige of the living room walls. I was to be seen but not heard, a piece of functional furniture in the diorama of our perfect life. Nicole had been a distant star for weeks, her light brilliant for everyone but me. With her friends, her laughter was a cascade of silver bells. With me, it was the clink of ice in an empty glass. Her coworker, Evan, was the gravitational center of her new universe. He was here again tonight, a permanent fixture in our home, exuding the kind of polished, predatory charm that men like him mistake for personality. He lingered near Nicole, a satellite in a decaying orbit, his whispers too low, his hand on her arm too familiar. I told myself it was paranoia, a weed growing in the neglected garden of my own insecurities. But paranoia is just truth in its larval stage. Tonight, it would hatch. The evening began its slow, predictable waltz. Nicole, a hummingbird of social grace, flitted from guest to guest, her smile a carefully painted mask. She was basking in the glow of adoration, a currency she craved more than air. I moved on the periphery, a ghost in my own home, my presence acknowledged only when a glass needed refilling. Evan held court from the center of the sofa, a full-leather throne for a cardboard king. His stories were loud, embellished tales of corporate conquests and exotic travels, and the small crowd hung on his every word, their laughter a chorus of sycophantic approval. Nicole was beside him, her body angled toward his as if seeking warmth from a fire I could no longer provide. Her laughter was the brightest, her touch the most frequent. I was an island, and the tide was their amusement. It happened during one of Evan's self-aggrandizing anecdotes, something about closing a deal in Singapore. The room was ringing with forced merriment. I stood by the archway leading to the kitchen, a sentinel at the border of my own exile, a tight, meaningless smile plastered on my face. That's when Nicole's voice, sharp and saccharine, sliced through the noise. "Adrian," she called, her tone a weapon wrapped in velvet. "Why don't you come join the fun? Or are you too busy sulking in the corner?" The laughter sputtered and died. The room pivoted. Every pair of eyes, glinting with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity, landed on me. I could feel the weight of their judgment, the heat of their collective smirk. They were vultures, and they smelled weakness. "I'm fine." I managed, my voice a stranger in my own throat. The smile on my face felt like a crack in drying clay. But she wasn't finished. The performance required a finale. She rose from the sofa, a theatrical flourish in her movement, and picked up a glass pitcher of ice water from the coffee table. Her eyes, which I once thought held the cosmos, were now just cold, hard stones. "Oh, come on, lighten up," she cooed, walking toward me. "Here, let me help you cool off." Time seemed to warp, stretching and thinning. I saw the tilt of her wrist, the condensation beating on the glass, the slow-motion cascade of liquid. Before my mind could command my body to move, the shock of ice-cold water hit me. It streamed over my head, down my face, and soaked the front of my shirt, a baptism of pure, unadulterated contempt. The room exploded. It wasn't just laughter. It was a roar, a tidal wave of ridicule that crashed over me. Evan's braying was the loudest, a triumphant, guttural sound. He leaned back, his arm draped possessively over the back of the sofa where Nicole had been sitting, his face a mask of smug satisfaction. The others, her so-called friends, joined in, their voices a cacophony of jeering. I stood there, drenched and shuddering, the water plastering my hair to my scalp and my shirt to my skin. My hands, hanging uselessly at my sides, clenched into fists so tight my knuckles ached. The pounding in my chest wasn't anger, not yet. It was something deeper, colder. It was the sound of a foundation cracking, of a final support beam giving way. Nicole looked at me, a triumphant glint in her eyes. She had won. She had publicly cast me as the pathetic, sulking husband and herself as the fun-loving, carefree wife, shackled to a bore. "It's just a joke, Adrian," she said, her voice dripping with the false innocence of a playground bully. "Don't be such a buzzkill." I didn't speak. I didn't shout or curse or give her the satisfaction of a reaction. To react would be to play her game, to validate her power. Instead, I straightened my spine, letting the cold water drip onto the hardwood floor. I met her gaze, holding it until a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. Then, without a word, I turned and walked out of the room. The laughter followed me into the kitchen, but it sounded different now, distant, muffled, like a storm passing over the next town. A strange, glacial clarity settled over me. This wasn't about a pitcher of water. It was about the slow, methodical erosion of respect. It was about her flaunting her lover in my home, using her friends as an audience for my public execution. It was about her needing to believe that I was small so she could feel big. I grabbed a dish towel from the counter and wiped my face, staring at my distorted reflection in the dark kitchen window. The man staring back was a stranger, his eyes hollow but for a single, burning ember. "This ends tonight." Asterisk the thought came, not with heat, but with the cold, hard certainty of forged steel. She thought she had humiliated me. She thought she had won. But she had made a fatal miscalculation. She had pushed a quiet man, a man who accommodated and absorbed and endured, past the point of endurance. She had no concept of what that man was capable of when he finally decided to push back. The first move of the game had been hers, crass, loud, and obvious. But the game was far from over, and my moves would be silent, precise, and devastating. I spent the rest of the evening in the sterile silence of the guest room, listening to the party die a slow, boisterous death. The muffled sounds from the living room were a soundtrack to my transformation. It wasn't the laughter of joy. It was the laughter of predators feasting on a fresh kill. My kill. Nicole's voice, artificially high and playful, would occasionally rise above the din, always loud enough to signal that I remained the butt of the joke. Evan's smug, rumbling laugh was its constant companion, the sound of a man marking his territory. My territory. My fists clenched and unclenched on the starched guest room comforter as I stared at the blank wall, imprinting the memory of each sound, each insult, onto my mind. They thought I would retreat, lick my wounds, and return to my role as the doormat. They had mistaken my patience for weakness. That was the last mistake they would ever make. The morning broke gray and sullen, the house reeking of stale wine and regret. Or perhaps that was just me. The last of her friends had stumbled out in the pre-dawn hours. Nicole was still asleep, her arrogance momentarily dormant. I, however, hadn't slept. I had spent the night staring at the ceiling, my mind a cold, whirring engine, connecting dots I had long ignored. The water was merely the exclamation point at the end of a long, cruel sentence. It was about a pattern, a gradual, deliberate dismantling of our life together. Nicole's actions hadn't occurred in a vacuum. She had an ecosystem of enablers. There was Lila, her best friend since college, a woman whose own life was a monument to self-interest. Lila was the self-appointed queen of their little hive, always whispering in Nicole's ear, encouraging her to live a little, which was code for put yourself first, always. She had fueled Nicole's ego and contempt for me with the dedication of a priestess tending a flame. Then there was Mark, the quiet observer. He wasn't as venomous as Lila or as brazen as Evan, but his silence was a form of poison all its own. Mark detested conflict, and he would laugh along with any joke, no matter how cruel, to avoid it. I'd seen the flicker of discomfort in his eyes during their gatherings, a fleeting moment of conscience, but it was always extinguished by his cowardice. His complicity was a quiet, steady drumbeat in the symphony of my humiliation. And Evan, the alpha predator, the root of the rot. He was a man who measured his worth by what he could take from others. He had slithered into our lives, identified the cracks in our foundation, and began methodically chipping away, planting seeds of dissatisfaction in Nicole's mind, promising her a life of excitement I supposedly couldn't provide. I was in the kitchen, the bitter aroma of coffee filling the silence, when Nicole finally emerged. She wore a silk robe, her hair a mess, but she didn't look remorseful. She looked victorious. A faint, self-satisfied smile played on her lips as she reached for a mug. "Morning," she said, her voice casual, as if last night were a distant, amusing anecdote. I didn't answer. I poured my coffee, the black liquid a reflection of my mood, and turned to leave. "Oh, come on, Adrian," she called after me, her voice laced with that familiar, mocking tone. "You're not still mad about last night, are you? It was just a joke. You have to learn to laugh at yourself." I stopped in the doorway, my back to her. "Funny," I said, my voice low and steady, each word a carefully placed stone. "I don't remember laughing." Her smirk faltered. I didn't wait to see it crumble completely. That day, I began to lay the foundations of my counteroffensive. A direct confrontation was pointless. People like them were masters of deflection, of twisting reality until they became the victims. If I wanted to reclaim not just my dignity, but the very narrative of my life, I had to be smarter. I had to be a ghost in their machine. My thoughts turned to Sam. We hadn't spoken much since Nicole had systematically pruned my old friendships from our life, deeming them not ambitious or interesting enough for her new social echelon. Sam was a paramedic, a man who lived his life in the chaotic space between life and death. He was level-headed, pragmatic, and fiercely loyal. If anyone could help me navigate this fog of betrayal, it was him. I found a quiet corner of the house and dialed his number. "She poured water on you?" Sam's voice was a low growl of disbelief after I had laid out the sordid details. "In front of her lover and all her friends?" "Yep," I said, taking a sip of the now-cold coffee. "And you didn't flatten them?" "No," I replied. The thought had crossed my mind, a fleeting, primitive urge. But that would have been their victory. "I don't want to lose it, Sam. I want to take it all back." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then a low whistle. "All right, Adrian. I'm listening. Tell me what you need." By the time I hung up, the chaotic emotions of the past 12 hours had coalesced into a single, sharp point of purpose. A plan. Nicole, Evan, Lila, and the rest of them believed they had won. They thought I would retreat into the background, another casualty of their casual cruelty. They were about to learn that the quietest people often have the most to say when they finally decide to speak. The first move was theirs, a clumsy, public spectacle. My turn was next, and my game would be played in the shadows. It's a peculiar phenomenon, the clarity that follows a profound shock. For months, I had been navigating my own life by touch, stumbling through a fog of denial and willful ignorance. The signs of Nicole's betrayal were all there, scattered like breadcrumbs I had refused to see. But now, with Sam's voice still echoing in my ear, a voice of unwavering, grounding loyalty, the fog had burned away. I could see everything. Nicole wasn't just unfaithful. She was a conductor, orchestrating a symphony of disrespect. Every shared joke at my expense, every dismissive wave of her hand when I spoke, every long, languid glance she gave Evan, it was all part of the performance. She hadn't stumbled into an affair. She had auditioned for it, with her friends as the casting directors, and they had all thrived on the drama. It was time to bring down the curtain. My first step was to become an archaeologist of my own life, excavating the details I had buried. People who believe they are untouchable grow careless, and Nicole was no exception. Her phone, once a private device, now buzzed with notifications she barely bothered to conceal. Her calendar was a tapestry of lies. Late work meetings that coincided perfectly with Evan's free evenings, yoga retreats that required no athletic wear. Her spending had become reckless, receipts for lavish dinners for two, charges from jewelry stores for pieces I'd never seen her wear. But circumstantial evidence wasn't enough. I needed irrefutable proof, a weapon so sharp it could sever her web of lies in a single stroke. This was where Sam's pragmatism proved invaluable. He knew people. Not shady people, but practical people who got things done. He introduced me to a private investigator named Ree. Ree's office was a small, cluttered room above a laundromat, smelling faintly of bleach and old paper. He was a man you would forget the moment you passed him on the street, mid-40s, thinning hair, nondescript clothes. But his eyes were like a hawk's, missing nothing. "So," Ree said, leaning back in his creaking office chair, steepling his fingers. "You're looking for something specific, or just the general dirt?" "Both," I replied, my voice steady. "I want to know how deep this goes. Who's involved, where they meet, how long it's been going on. I want everything." Ree gave a single, sharp nod. "Give me a week." While Ree dug into the underbelly of Nicole's life, I turned my focus to her court of enablers. They weren't just bystanders, they were accessories. Lila, the self-proclaimed best friend, was the most egregious. She lived for vicarious drama, and Nicole's affair was her favorite soap opera. I remembered now that it was Lila who had introduced Nicole to Evan at a company party months ago, a casual introduction that now felt like a calculated move. And Mark, the silent partner. His sin was one of omission. He was a man so terrified of making waves that he would rather watch someone drown. His complicity was quieter, but no less damning. He offered the veneer of friendship while allowing the rot to fester. And then there was Evan. Ree's initial background check confirmed my suspicions. He was a corporate predator, known for his charm and his ruthlessness. Nicole wasn't a partner to him. She was a conquest, a trophy to be displayed. He was a man who built his identity on the wreckage of others. A week later, recalled. His findings were a gut punch, even though I had expected them. Your wife and Evan Carter have been involved for nearly a year, he stated, his voice devoid of emotion. A simple delivery of fact. They primarily meet at his apartment, sometimes hotels. She's also been financially supporting him. Gifts, dinners, even covered his rent a couple of times when he was between deals. The words landed like stones in my stomach. It wasn't just an affair. She was funding her own betrayal. I clenched the phone, my knuckles white. What else? Carter's not clean, Ree continued. He's running several side ventures that skate the line of legality. Looks like fraud, mostly. I've got copies of emails, bank transfers, even a few recorded phone conversations with disgruntled associates. If this goes public, he's not just looking at a ruined reputation. He's looking at prison time. A cold, dark satisfaction washed over me. Evan, the untouchable charmer, had left a trail of digital breadcrumbs leading straight to his own destruction. And Nicole, blinded by whatever fantasy he had sold her, had tethered herself to his sinking ship. That night, I sat in the quiet of my kitchen, the file from Ree spread across the table. It was all there. Photos of them entering a hotel, text messages dripping with cheap sentiment, financial records that painted a picture of a fool and her money. My first instinct was to confront her, to throw the evidence in her face and watch her perfect mask shatter. But that was an emotional response, and emotion was a luxury I could no longer afford. It would give her an out, a chance to spin the narrative, to cry, to apologize, to make it about my anger instead of her actions. No, this wasn't just about exposing an affair. It was about total dismantlement. Lila, Mark, and the entire chorus of enablers needed to see the unvarnished truth. They needed to understand the consequences of propping up a lie. I picked up the phone and called Sam. My voice was calm, the voice of a man who had already seen the end of the story. It's worse than I thought. Figured as much, he replied. What's the next move, General? A grim smile touched my lips. We're not going to push them, I said. We're going to give them just enough rope, and we're going to let them hang themselves. One by one. Sam chuckled, a low, appreciative sound. Now we're talking. As I hung up, I felt the tectonic plates of my life shift. For the first time in a year, I was no longer the victim. I was the architect. Nicole thought she had concluded our story with a splash of water and a chorus of laughter. She was wrong. She had merely written the prologue. I would be the one to write the end. Sitting in my kitchen late that night, surrounded by the neatly organized evidence of my wife's duplicity, I felt a strange and potent alchemy at work. The raw, messy emotions of hurt and betrayal were crystallizing into something cold, hard, and sharp. Power. Nicole and her coterie of jesters operated on a diet of emotional chaos. They expected outbursts, tears, desperate confrontations. It fed them. I would starve them. My revenge would not be a wildfire of rage. It would be a glacier, slow, silent, and unstoppable, carving a new landscape out of the world they thought they owned. The first piece to move on the board was Evan. His financial misdeeds were a ticking time bomb, and I was all too happy to provide the spark. I meticulously curated the most incriminating evidence from Ree's file. Emails outlining fraudulent investment schemes, bank statements showing suspicious transfers, and the transcript of a damning phone call where he boasted about misleading a client. I compiled it all into a single, anonymous digital package. Sam, with his paramedic's understanding of protocol and clean procedure, helped me craft the narrative. It has to look like it's coming from inside his circle, he advised, sipping coffee in my now strategic headquarters of a kitchen. A disgruntled partner, a jilted associate, someone who knows the details. Together, we drafted an anonymous email, a whistleblower's desperate plea for justice, and sent the entire package to Megan Riley, an investigative journalist at the city's most respected newspaper. Megan had a reputation like a terrier. Once she sank her teeth into a story of corporate malfeasance, she didn't let go. Evan's carefully constructed world was about to come under a very bright, very public spotlight. With that fuse lit, I turned my attention to the supporting cast. Nicole's friends thrived on a carefully curated image of social superiority. It was time to shatter the mirror they so admired. Lila was first. The queen bee. Ree's investigation had revealed her own collection of secrets. A mountain of credit card debt hidden from her husband, a discreet affair with a married superior at her marketing firm, and a nasty habit of stealing creative ideas from junior colleagues. I didn't need to destroy her, merely to introduce a little chaos into her pristine kingdom. Using a burnable email address, I sent an anonymous, carefully worded tip to her company's HR department, vaguely alluding to unethical relationships and intellectual property theft within her team. I sent another, more detailed tip about her affair to a notorious local gossip blog. I didn't have to prove anything. I just had to plant the seeds of doubt. Within days, the whispers would begin, the sideways glances would accumulate, and her social capital would begin its slow, inexorable decline. Next was Mark, the complicit coward. His weakness was not ambition or malice, but alcohol. I'd seen him at Nicole's parties, his hand shaking slightly as he poured his fourth or fifth whiskey, his laughter growing just a bit too loud. He was a functional alcoholic, but the cracks were showing. A simple, anonymous call to his company's employee assistance program, disguised as a concerned colleague worried about his erratic behavior and signs of burnout, was all it took. It wasn't overtly malicious, it was framed as help, but it would force him into a spotlight he dreaded, compelling him to confront a demon he'd kept chained in his basement. His silence had consequences, and now he would have to face them. While these smaller fires began to smolder, I laid the groundwork for the main event. A private confrontation was a courtesy Nicole and Evan no longer deserved. Their crime was public humiliation, their punishment would be the same. I learned from a stray comment Nicole made that Evan was hosting another one of his intimate gatherings in 2 weeks, a celebratory dinner at his apartment. The perfect stage. Sam was integral. He wasn't just my moral support. He was my ace in the hole. His connections as a first responder gave us options. He knew how to command a scene, how to lend an air of officiality to chaos, how to turn a private drama into a public spectacle that couldn't be ignored. "Are you sure you want to do this in front of everyone?" Sam asked one night as we finalized the details on a whiteboard I'd set up in my study. They laughed at me in front of everyone. I stated, my voice devoid of emotion. They don't get to hide in the shadows now. They will face the consequences in the same arena where they committed the crime. Sam's jaw was set, his expression firm. Then let's make sure it's a night they never forget. The final piece was the timing. Megan Riley's article on Evan was tentatively scheduled to be published online on the evening of the party. The public condemnation would land at the exact moment their private world was imploding. It was poetic. In the days leading up to the party, I moved through my house like a ghost, a silent observer in a life that was no longer mine. Nicole, oblivious, floated on a cloud of arrogance, planning her outfit for Evan's party, chattering on the phone with a Lila who was likely already feeling the heat of suspicion at her office. On the evening of the party, I stood before the mirror in my bedroom, adjusting the knot of my tie. I felt a profound, almost unnerving calm. This wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about balance. It was about restoring a natural order they had so casually upended. Nicole thought she wanted to play games, to rewrite the rules of our marriage to suit her whims. Tonight, I was going to show her what it felt like when the game board was flipped and she was no longer a player, but a pawn. The final 48 hours before Evan's party were a study in suspended animation. The traps were set, the fuses lit. All that remained was the quiet, agonizing wait for the detonation. My mind replayed the water incident on a loop, not with the sting of humiliation anymore, but as a clinical case study. I dissected Nicole's mocking tone, Evan's triumphant smirk, Lila's hyena-like cackle. The memories no longer caused pain. They were fuel, reinforcing my resolve, sharpening the edge of my purpose. Nicole remained cocooned in her own self-importance, utterly oblivious. She hummed as she tried on dresses, her primary concern which shade of red best complemented her complexion. I was a non-entity to her, a piece of the scenery she no longer noticed. It was the perfect camouflage. The night before the party, I overheard her on the phone with Lila, her voice a giddy, conspiratorial whisper. She was in the kitchen, and I was in the hall, a shadow she didn't see. Evan is pulling out all the stops for tomorrow, she chirped. It's going to be absolutely perfect. You won't believe the wine he got. A pause, and then Lila's voice, tinny through the phone's speaker. What about Adrian? Is he coming? Nicole let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound like shattering glass. Oh, please. He wouldn't dare. After last time, he knows his place now. A cold smile touched my lips in the darkness of the hallway. She was right. I didn't know my place. It was at the center of the storm I was about to unleash. On the day of the party, a preternatural calm descended upon me. The chaos I had set in motion was a distant hum, a vibration I could feel in the soles of my feet. Megan's article was queued up, ready to go live at 8 p.m. sharp. I dressed with meticulous care, a dark, well-tailored suit, a crisp white shirt, a conservative tie. I was not dressing for a party. I was dressing for a reckoning. I intended to be the calmest, most composed person in the room when the walls came down. Nicole saw me as I was adjusting my cufflinks in the bedroom mirror. Her pre-party excitement faltered, replaced by a flicker of surprise and suspicion. What's the occasion? She asked, her eyes narrowing. Just heading out, I replied, my voice even casual. She tilted her head, a gesture I once found endearing, now overtly critical. You're not going to Evans, are you? I turned from the mirror to face her directly, letting her see the quiet confidence in my eyes. Why wouldn't I? Her mouth opened slightly. She looked genuinely baffled, as if a household appliance had suddenly started speaking. You weren't invited, Adrian. A slow, deliberate smile spread across my face. It wasn't a smile of warmth, but of grim satisfaction. I don't need an invitation, Nicole. It's my life you've all found so entertaining. I think it's only fair I join the festivities. She was speechless. For the first time in months, I had left her utterly, completely speechless. In her eyes, I saw not anger, but the first glimmer of fear. The doormat had just stood up. I arrived at Evan's apartment building at 7:45 p.m. The party was in full swing, the sound of smug laughter and generic electronic music spilling out from his penthouse unit. I stood in the hallway for a moment, letting the sounds wash over me, a final reminder of why I was here. I took a deep breath, straightened my tie, and rang the doorbell. The door was opened by Mark, who froze, his drink halfway to his lips. The music seemed to dip as heads turned. The room fell silent, one by one, like dominoes toppling. Every eye in that crowded, overpriced apartment was on me. Nicole was standing by the sleek, minimalist bar, a glass of champagne in hand, her face a mask of disbelief and horror. Evan was beside her, his arm draped casually around her waist. He recovered first, that arrogant smirk sliding back into place like a shield. Adrian, he said, his voice a low, condescending drawl. I'm surprised to see you. Didn't think this was your scene. I stepped inside, letting the door click shut behind me. I met his gaze without flinching. Why wouldn't it be? I replied, my voice carrying easily across the silent room. After all, I wouldn't want to miss a toast to your success, Evan. All of it. His smirk wavered, just for a second. Nicole looked like she had seen a ghost. I scanned the room, my gaze sweeping over Lila, Mark, and the other jesters from her court. Their faces were a mixture of confusion and growing unease. They could feel the shift in the atmosphere, the sudden drop in pressure that precedes a storm. Shall we get this started? I asked the room at large, raising an imaginary glass in a mock toast. They didn't know it yet, but the party was over. The real entertainment was about to begin. The silence in Evan's apartment was a living thing, heavy and suffocating. It pressed in on the guests, their forced smiles frozen on their faces. I was the singularity at the center of the room, warping the social physics around me. Evan, ever the performer, tried to reclaim control, his voice oozing with the false bonhomie he used to disarm his marks. Well, this is unexpected, he said, his smirk not quite reaching his eyes. Glad you could make it, Adrian. Though I have to ask, why the sudden desire to socialize? I allowed a small, cold smile. Oh, I think you know why, Evan. You've all been so deeply invested in my personal life lately. It felt impolite not to return the favor. A nervous titter came from Lila's direction, but it died in her throat when my gaze found hers. Nicole stood rooted to the spot by the bar, her champagne glass trembling in her hand. Adrian, she began, her voice a strained whisper. This isn't the time or place. Oh, I disagree. I cut her off, my voice sharp and clear, slicing through the tension. This is the perfect time, and this is the perfect place. I took a step further into the room, my eyes methodically panning across the faces of her friends, the jury that had so eagerly convicted me. Let's start with some proper introductions, shall we? You all know me as Nicole's quiet husband, the buzzkill, the man you so enjoyed laughing at. My gaze landed squarely on Lila. Her makeup couldn't hide the sudden pallor of her skin. And you, Lila, you've been the lead cheerleader in this whole affair, haven't you? Constantly whispering in Nicole's ear, telling her she deserved better, stoking the fires of her dissatisfaction. All while your own life is a house of cards built on debt and deceit. Lila's mouth fell open, a gasp catching in her throat. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? I asked softly, before turning to Mark, who looked like he was trying to merge with the wallpaper. And you, Mark, the silent partner. You saw it all, didn't you? You stood by and watched, too much of a coward to speak up, content to laugh along so long as the cruelty wasn't aimed at you. How's that mandatory counseling going, by the way? Mark visibly flinched, his face flushing a deep, mottled red. The other guests were shifting uncomfortably, their eyes darting between me and their disgraced hosts. The party atmosphere had completely evaporated, replaced by the sterile air of an interrogation room. Finally, I turned my full attention to Evan. He was leaning against the sofa, attempting an air of casual indifference, but a muscle was twitching in his jaw. And then there's the man of the hour, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous tenor. The man who thought he could waltz into my life, take what wasn't his, and face no consequences. Evan shrugged, the gesture stiff and unnatural. She made her choice, buddy. It's not my fault. No, I agreed. It's not. But the fraud, Evan? The rigged business deals? The people whose life savings you've funneled into this monument to your ego? I'd say that's very much your fault. From the inside pocket of my suit jacket, I withdrew a slim manila folder. I held it up for all to see. You see, while you were playing games, I was doing my homework. The smirk was gone from Evan's face now, replaced by a dawning horror. What the hell is that? I walked to the low-glass coffee table in the center of the room and opened the folder, pulling out a sheaf of papers. I laid them out, one by one. Bank statements, copies of incriminating emails, transcripts. This is your life, Evan. The real one. The one you hide behind the designer suits and the smug attitude. It's a detailed account of every corner you've cut, every person you've conned. Nicole rushed forward, her face streaked with tears. Adrian, stop this. Please stop. Why? I snapped, my voice finally cracking with the cold fury I had held in check for so long. I turned on her, my gaze pinning her in place. Why should I stop? Did you stop when you poured that pitcher of water over my head? Did you stop when you laughed with him in my own house? You don't get to call for mercy now, Nicole. You forfeited that right. She recoiled as if struck. And then came the masterstroke. Right on cue. At 8:02 p.m., the doorbell rang. A hush fell over the room. Evan's eyes were wide with panic. I watched as he numbly walked to the door and opened it. Standing there was Sam, dressed in his full paramedic uniform. He held a clipboard and had an expression of calm, professional authority. Behind him, visible in the hallway, were two uniformed police officers. Sorry to interrupt, Sam said, his voice calm but firm, projecting to the entire room. Evan Carter? Evan's face was the color of ash. Why, yes. We've received a credible report, corroborated by evidence sent to the press, regarding extensive financial fraud and endangerment, Sam stated, his eyes flicking down to his clipboard. The authorities have been alerted to your location. I'm here as a first responder to ensure there are no medical emergencies during their arrival. The room erupted. It was a symphony of chaos. Nicole shrieked Evan's name, her voice a raw, desperate plea. Lila was backing away toward the door. Mark was staring at the floor as if hoping it would swallow him whole. What is he talking about, Evan? Nicole cried, grabbing his arm. Is this true? Evan stammered, his confidence utterly shattered. No, it's a mistake. This is insane. But it wasn't insane. It was the truth, laid bare under the bright, unforgiving lights of his own party. As the police officers stepped inside to escort a stunned and protesting Evan from the apartment, I stood back and watched the beautiful, terrible destruction I had wrought. The party was over. The laughter was gone. Nicole turned to me, her face a mess of tears and disbelief, her world collapsing around her. Adrian. I didn't know. I looked at her, at the woman who had shattered my trust and danced on the pieces, and I felt nothing but a vast, empty calm. You chose him, Nicole, I said, my voice flat and final. You chose all of this. Now you get to live with it. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the apartment, leaving her and her friends to the wreckage. The cool night air hit my face as I stepped outside. The storm had passed, and for the first time in a very, very long time, I was free.